They came for us at dawn, the kind of dawn that looks like a bruise. Purple light leaking into the alleyways of old Karachi, the city we thought the world had abandoned. The ship's shadow swallowed the roof lines, and for a moment, I could still pretend the noise was thunder. My two sisters, Alia, practical as a bolt of steel, and Mira, who could spin a lullaby from a torn radio wire, were sleeping when they dragged us into the belly of the thing. We were 5 when our mother taught us to hide under the ruined prayer tower when soldiers passed. She taught us how to fold fear into small, usable shapes. She taught us that names were lights. When the aliens, tall as apartment blocks, silver-limbed and speaking gravitational sentences, swept us up, I thought of those lessons the way you look at a life raft. I held my sister's hands like ballast. The tribunal had the smell of antiseptic. Not chemical, but the legal kind, the smell of arguments that end the same way no matter how beautifully spoken. They didn't hide the stage. It was a glass disc over an ocean of bright machines. Behind it stood 3 of them, faces like logic gates, eyes like polished brass that didn't blink. One of them, taller, with a scar that ran like a river through its mandible, spoke in a tongue that made the floor hum. "You are human," it said in perfect, cruel basic. "You are 3. Our biosensors indicate insufficient genetic variance in your cluster. Protocol 12.7. One must be sacrificed to maintain interspecies equilibrium. Choose one sister human. Other will be put to death now." There was no we. There was only the imperative and the silent pressure in my chest like a hand. Alia stood straight then, the way sunflowers do when rain comes. Mira was a bird, quivering. The tribunal screens showed my family cluster, our lineage, a lattice of genes and migration points. Their language called it overlap. Their law framed our faces as problems. "One," the tall one repeated. "Declare." I tasted copper. I could have named her Alia, because she was the eldest and had always shouldered things like a bridge, or I could have named Mira, because her laugh had kept me alive the winter we ate watermelons soft with rot. I could have dragged my knuckles along the edge of logic and chosen the lesser of 2 goods, which life had more to give, which had a child inside them, which had maps we could sell. But the tribunal did not ask for plans or excuses. It wanted the binary. I have a memory of us at 7, sharing a loaf of bread by the canal, splitting it into 3 uneven portions until the smallest piece still managed to make all of us sated. We swore then to never choose for one another. We named ourselves the 3, and it felt like armor, unity against life. "Please," I started, and the word was childlike and useless. Alia's voice was a low thing. "Tell them we can be contained, that we can be quarantined. That will be useful." Mira gripped my arm. "Lie. Say anything." I tried to bargain. I offered to work. I offered to be taken far away, to be made a statistic in some labor ledger. The tribunal clicked through options with indifferent beeps. Their law would not be parceled out in installments. "Protocol 12.7 is absolute," the scarred one said. "One life removed reduces cluster pressure by 0.67 units. The colony's survival index increases beyond threshold." We were small currency in a ledger I could not see. Then, because people are not built entirely of the same elements as logic, memories rose like a tide. Myra's hand pressing a bandage to my head when I split it on the stair. Alia stealing medicine for a fever that shouldn't have been treated because the ration line was too long. The way they argued over which song to play on our father's old recorder. I remembered their faces clear and alive and ordinary. The tribunal screens showed their faces like cells under a microscope. Thought absurdly about names. About how our mother would have chosen names for us that didn't fit the sacrifice they demanded. Names were not just sounds, they were small rebellions. I looked at my hands and the faint scar across my thumb from when I wired a transmitter and set a burst of music into the sky that lasted all of 5 minutes. Radio waves do not die easily. Maybe the sound is a kind of prayer. Pick one, the tribunal said again. I had no plausible plan left that spared both. Logic courted me. Pick the one with the most years left, the one with the least genetic overlap with colony members, the one who could be useful to the system if spared. But each calculation pushed me further from my sisters. There was a clause in my mother's teaching I had always loved. When you cannot do what is demanded, choose what you can live with. It sounded like cowardice then. Now it felt like the only compass. Neither, I said. The tribunal's brass eyes latched on to the syllable as if it were a code. Invalid choice, they said. I swallowed. Then, and hear me, I'll take their place. Silence is a different animal in an alien courtroom. Has weight. The machines hummed, the brass eyes calculated. The tall one leaned in, and its mandible scar flexed as if tasting some new spice. You propose substitution, it said. Protocol 12.7 does not allow voluntary replacement. Not substitution, I said. Voluntary offering. There was back home an old right. When a wrong has no remedy, sometimes a person offers. It is what we have when nothing else is possible. Offering was a human custom of pointless romance more than law. In the orb of systems we had no votes. Offering sounded like a song more than an argument. Still, the tall one's head cocked. The brass pooled numbers and then blinked. Why would a human do that? What is the benefit to the colony? Because it's the only thing I can do to keep them, I said. Because I cannot choose which of my sisters dies. But I can choose to die. The tribunal processed. The scarred one gestured to the screens. Voluntary death by chosen's consent is historically documented as self-destruction, not substitution. It increases cluster dissipation by 1.0 units if the subject is primary caretaker. Do you claim primary caretaker status? The question felt like being asked by an examiner and accused of treason. I am not an examiner of phrases, I said. I am merely telling the truth. We argued words as if they were stones. Alya wanted to protest, to bribe, to bargain with honeyed logic. Mira wept in small, animal bursts. I heard my heartbeat like a drum. They gave me a ritual. There was a chamber where light had no shadow, and a table that smelled of ozone. The executioner, if I could call it that, it was more a machine with a name I couldn't pronounce, spoke to me without a face. Consent is recorded. You will breathe into this device. You will name the ones you wish saved. You will sign the release. You will step into the chamber. A piece of the city where my mother taught me to hide lived in me. Stubbornness like mortar. I thought then of the way my sisters would carry on. Myra's small stitches of laughter, Alya's stern survival. I thought of our mother's stitch as well. How she said that the measure of a life is not only what you keep for yourself but what you refuse to give when all else is pressured away. I could have refused. I could have died clinging to that defiance. But that would have left them with a life that smelled of my choice, perhaps a life that would rot under the pressure of being the chosen one who lived. Instead I chose a different burden. If one life must go, I would make the ledger balancer think it was fulfilling its law without depriving my sisters of the ordinary, grouchy, messy future each had earned. When the devices asked me to name, my voice was a crack in glass. Mira and Alya, I said. Their faces swam with relief so sharp it hurt. They recorded my consent in a language of blinks and beeps. The chamber sealed. I thought about the sun on the canal, the three of us splitting a loaf. Then, something else happened, an accident of engineering and my own stubbornness. The executioner's protocol required a breath test for purity. A biometric barcode that matched the consenting subject. Scanned my throat, my pulse. Somewhere in the sequence, a leak opened in their code. The machine asked for authorization lines I had, on a whim years ago, made for a radio transmitter. An idling skill, a way to repurpose a public access transmitter to hide a broadcast. I had never thought these two things would meet. The authorization window blinked. I remembered how to sing a frequency into a lock. My mouth formed numbers like a child learning to read, and the chamber's lock read them. It couldn't differentiate between an offering and a piracy signature. The machine, not designed for poetry, read me as compliant. They did not anticipate the warmth of a human stubbornness when it intersects with their cold logic. The chamber engaged. Lights wrote themselves into the air. I heard the hiss of compressed silence. My sister's hands on my wrists were small and finite. Myra's tears were sweet with relief. Alya's jaw thudded like a drum, the sound of someone who is angry at fate because it refuses to be simple. As the anesthetic bled across my vision, the tall one spoke, voice velvet and terrible. You have offered. We accept. Protocol fulfilled. I woke, if waking is the right word, in a place that smelled of salt and glass. I was strapped to a table, but my breath came. There was light and pain and the goddess of improbable luck. They had not killed me. They had misread something in their own chains of reason. My act flagged as both consent and corruption. The machines did not like undecidables. The tribunal reassessed with numbers running like slow rivulets. My offering had upset their equilibrium in a way they could not tolerate. They released my sisters. They reclassified us in their lattice with new labels. Protected by Subject 7012, which meant little for me personally but everything for them. They took me instead. There was bargaining after the fact, in vaulted rooms where brass eyes were less sharp and human words were thick with pleading. My sisters wrote to me on scraps. Alya's letters were full of plans, Myra's full of small, stupid jokes. They came when they could, carrying supplies that tasted like home. I learned the mechanics of things being stolen from you without malice. The tribunal had learned the mechanic of contingency. Their law bent when presented with contradictions in human behavior that the code could not parse. I learned the softness of their faces when my sisters sang to them a song that made no sense in their scales. Music is a kind of bribery. It tells other intelligences that you are more than a column in a ledger. They offered me a deal, halfway between mercy and prison. I would live, in a way, monitored, useful in experiments, a scholar of ethics among their tribunals, and my sisters would live free among the human lanes they respected now because of me. It was not a fair exchange. Nothing in that hall was. But neither did the ledger fully close. They had not taken my life, only rearranged the cost. Years later, I sit by a canal that remembers our childhood. Alya brings me food that tastes like family. Mira hums while she knits. The tribunal's scars are a rumor between us. People who were not there sometimes say things like, "Why didn't you choose?" As if there were an answer that could be simple. They ask me if I regret it. I can only tell them that regret is a private weather system. Sometimes I dream of the glass disc and the brass-eyed judges, and I wake with radio static on my tongue. My body still stiffens when a ship casts a shadow. But when I see my sisters laugh, clean and loud, just as they did when we split that stolen loaf, I understand why I did what I did. I did not save them from death so much as from the shape of a life that would have been carved out of grief and obligation. If you ask me now who I would pick, I will tell you this. I picked a kind of courage that was not heroic in the old ways. I picked a way to make the ledger wrong by being not wrong enough for them to stop. I picked my sister's possibility over my own rightness. That is my impossible choice. one that broke me in the ways the tribunal could quantify and mended me in the ways only living, stubborn kinship can. If you stand before a tribunal, real or metaphor, and they tell you to pick and one will die, remember that laws are made by beings who rarely understand the music that keeps families whole. Sometimes the only thing you can pick is yourself, and sometimes that is enough to set others free.